This is Research Like a Pro, episode 383, Early Love County Records. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi, Nicole. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I've been working a little bit on my Sally Keaton Phase 3 research project, which is focusing on Izard County and Fulton County, Arkansas. And it's been really neat to look at some of the land grants. You know, some of the only records that I can get are federal level because of burned courthouses. But one of the children of Sally Keaton married a man named Bartholomew Balance, and he patented land in Izard County in 1860. And so I've been looking at the History Geo website to see the first landowners project, shows you who owns land where and who the neighbors were. So I've been analyzing that and just getting started with my research in that way.
Oh, that's fun. I love that you're researching where all of our ancestors, well, not all of them, but where we had some and where I've done a lot of research. So it's fun. You're a little bit later in time, so a little bit different. Do you have tax records to work with
Not yet. That's on my research plan, though.
to see what they've got?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
just kind of
great.
behind. I'm a little behind the rest of the study group.
That's
but
okay.
but it's coming together. The research plan is almost done. I used AI to make my locality guides. I used deep research at ChatGPT for Izard County and Fulton County. And I'm kind of doing another one of my AI experiments to see how good those locality guides are. And I'm using them to make my research plans. And then, yeah, we'll see how they go.
Yeah, I think it's fun to just continue to test AI. I'm working on writing my report right now, and this is the fourth phase of my Cynthia Dillard research, if you can believe it. So, working on the background information, I created a project in Claude with my 3 previous projects and asked Claude to write the background based on what I discovered in those 3. And the AI did a pretty good job. I had to do quite a bit of telling it what I didn't want and to include some things I did want, but it went through my reports and found the source citations, and I asked it to put all the source citations in line. And then when I copied that and pasted it as Markdown in my Word document, it all came in really nicely. So I was pretty happy with that. As I've been reading through it, I've noticed some things I need to add. There are a couple things I took out, but it sure saved me a lot of time just having all of that synthesis done on my previous reports. So I think I've got my background information done, and now I want to start working on my findings. And I've got a research log. I downloaded the research log and the timeline in a CSV file and put that in my Cloud project. So I'm going to experiment a bit with asking it to write paragraphs for me from different rows. I'm not sure how well it'll be able to read the CSV, and that will be part of my test to see how it goes.
Well, from using a CSV recently in Claude, here's my advice. I think you should just, the first prompt when you upload the CSV file, have it just extract everything into a table. Then it doesn't have to keep going back and trying to read the file because it struggled with that the day I was doing it.
Excellent idea. So didn't you put the table back in as project knowledge?
You could, or you could just use that conversation.
To continue. Oh, I like that idea a lot. Yeah, sometimes it does struggle to read things, so that's a great idea. Okay.
Especially when you come back later to it, if you want to, usually the same day it can still read the file, but sometimes it struggles. But I wonder
Yeah.
if it would work better if you link to the file from your Google Drive, because I know Claude can do that.
Yeah, I've linked to different things from Google Drive. So I could put the CSV, I could create a Google Sheet. This is from Airtable. I wish we could link to Airtable, but I could make it a Google Sheet and link that. I'll have to experiment a little bit. I'll see what it can do, see what the best way is to work with that. But I definitely spent a lot of time on my research log with really good source citations and good notes and summaries and comments. So I feel like all the material is there for AI to help write my report. So I don't have to reinvent anything. I've already done a ton of writing in the log. So I really want to work on seeing the best way to get that information out of it. So thank you for the idea to do a table. I'll have to try 2 or 3 different things and see what works best.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do some announcements. We have our Research Like a Pro webinar for November coming up. This will be November 15th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Our presenter is Alice Childs, and the title is Autosomal DNA Analysis Helps Pinpoint Probable Parents for Cornelia Ingersoll. Cornelia was born about 1788 in Carmel, Dutchess, later Putnam County, New York. Cornelia's life after her marriage to Henry Stodgill was well documented. However, extensive documentary research in the Carmel area failed to reveal her parents' names. Autosomal DNA analysis left little doubt that Cornelia was the granddaughter of Josiah Ingersoll, Sr. However, Josiah fathered multiple children with 2 different wives. Autosomal DNA analysis combined with additional documentary research helped pinpoint Cornelia's most likely parents. And in this webinar, Alice will be talking about autosomal DNA analysis, using multiple test takers, half relationships and network graphs, New York research, pre-1850 research, probate records, and church records. So many amazing topics. Alice is an accredited genealogist specializing in U.S. research, specifically in the mid-Atlantic states of New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and Delaware. She is a graduate of the Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro DNA study groups and has subsequently served as a mentor for both study groups. Alice is currently serving as the Assistant Director of the BYU Center for Family History and Genealogy. She is also a professional speaker and the author of the Genealogy Now blog at alicechilds.com, where she shares family history resources and inspiration for genealogists of all ages and stages. Alice holds a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Brigham Young University. When she's not researching, Alice enjoys spending time with family, reading historical fiction, quilting, and gardening. So our next study group will be with DNA, begins February 2026. And if you're interested in joining us as a peer group leader, the application is on our website. Please join our newsletter that comes out every Monday to get our latest news. And for upcoming conferences, we're excited about Roots Tech, which will be happening March 5th through 7th in Salt Lake City. And you can register for $69 starting now.
Yay, Rootstack will be so fun. Well, after doing a lot of research at Love County, I wanted to go back there and learn about other records that existed. So today's podcast episode is going to be about learning about some of the early records at Love County Courthouse, just kind of exploring. My first day, I had found like 20 records for the Harris family. And so the second day, I went back to the courthouse and I didn't have like a specific research plan beyond exploring the oldest volumes to see what I might find there. Day 2 would prove interesting in some unexpected ways. Sometimes courthouse research yields really valuable discoveries, not because you know what you're looking for, but because you stumble upon records that help you understand the historical context and your ancestors' world. So, this is our 5th episode on my research trip to the Love County Courthouse and other areas in Love County. So, we're continuing on with the series today.
Well, you started off the day by going to the cemetery, and that was the Burneyville Cemetery where John C. Harris was buried. And you were able to document members of the Frazier family, relatives of Doc Harris's wife, Allie, who was also buried there. You found the graves of Allie's parents, Nancy Briscoe Frazier and Richard Frazier. And I'm so glad that you found them and took pictures, because when I was there just a month ago, I was able to use the little map we had as well as pictures for me to quickly find the same headstones. And I was trying to use the GPS coordinates, which worked really well for some of the family, but was a little off for some of the others. So, cemeteries are always a little tricky trying to figure out exactly where people are. So then you went over to the Leon Cemetery, where Arza Harris, who was John C.'s third wife, was buried along with two of her children. So you also took some time to drive around the actual land parcels you'd identified in your deed research. So you made good use of your time there and having your rental car so you could drive all over. It's such a beautiful rural area. I loved visiting there.
Right? It was really green when I was there in May. So was it green when you were there?
Yeah, it was beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful.
Well, after my tax findings the day before, I knew John C. Harris owned land in the town of Marietta. It had sometimes been called Marietta City in the tax records, but I had not found any of the deeds for that land in Marietta yet. I knew he was taxed for it in 1908, so I looked for early deed indexes. And on the first day of my research, I had used indexes that started in 1914, which I thought maybe there were some index books for the period between 1907 and 1914 when the county was created. I looked at a bunch of different volumes that didn't have their spines showing. I did eventually find an index for earlier years. This deed index contained the earliest recorded deeds from the county's formation in 1907 and the years immediately following. And it was for Township 7 South, Range 2 East, which is the area that includes Marietta City. And paging through the index, I came across a deed on January 31st, 1908, in Volume 1 of the deeds that immediately caught my attention because of the grantee's name, R.E. Frazier. And given that I had just visited the Burneyville Cemetery where my ancestor Richard Frazier was buried, I was excited to potentially find a connection. And Deed Book 1, when I looked inside, had handwritten instead of typed deeds that had been copied and rebound into a new book, as all of the deed books had been recently rebound into red hardcover, really sturdy books. And Book 1 contained the foundational land transactions that established the county's property ownership. And so it was interesting to be looking in that early deed book.
Ooh, that is so very interesting. So the other deed books did not have that same little explanation about the land transactions.
There wasn't an explanation per se. It's just what I noticed in the volume 1 of the deeds. They were handwritten and they were like the very first deeds.
Okay. Well, the 1908 deed, which was the R.E. Frazier deed that you'd seen in the index, and it was for Sophie Williams and then R.E. Frazier. And it had some really fascinating details about these complex land transactions because this is that transition period from Indian Territory to Oklahoma statehood. So the grantor was Sophie Williams, and she was née Sophie Bobb, which means she was born Sophie Bobb, identified as a mixed blood Choctaw Indian woman over 18, and she had a co-grantor, Jonas Williams. The grantee was R.E. Frazier of El Dorado, Kansas, and it was for $200. So the property description named a very specific piece of land that was within Section 21, Township 7 South, Range 2 East, located in Love County, Oklahoma. And the deed specifically stated it was for inherited lands, representing 1/4 of Sophie Williams' surplus filings. So this provided insight into how tribal members were disposing of lands they had received beyond their primary allotments. And you were really struck with the historical significance of what you were viewing. These were the very first official property transactions recorded after Oklahoma statehood and pinpointed that transition from the territory's complex tribal land systems to the American federal property law framework, so with the federal land system. So that is so neat that you were able to see that and understand what was going on there.
Yeah, it was really neat. Let's have a quick word from our sponsor. Ever wondered what life was really like for your ancestors? With newspapers.com, you can explore the world they lived in through their eyes and their time. Search over a billion newspaper pages dating from 1690 to 2025 and uncover the stories that shaped your family's past. From birth and wedding announcements to obituaries and community news, these pages hold the milestones and everyday moments that connect you to your roots. But it's more than names and dates. It's about standing in their shoes. Picture reading the local paper your great grandmother once held, or stumbling on a forgotten article about your grandfather's business. These aren't just clippings, they're pieces of your family's story. Newspapers.com turns curiosity into connection. Start your journey today at newspapers.com because sometimes the past isn't just history, it's a story waiting to be discovered. Come make infinite discoveries today on newspapers.com. Use promo code FamilyLocket for a 20% discount on your subscription.
So now let's talk about this whole idea of Indian Territory land allotments. And this is such a great use for AI. So you use Claude AI and gave it the task to use its research capabilities and write a report based on the web sources about land allotments during this transition from Indian Territory to Oklahoma statehood. And so AI came back with this report. It said the transition from Indian Territory to Oklahoma statehood between 1900 and 1910 fundamentally transformed over 6.3 million acres of Chickasaw Nation territory through federal allotment policies administered by the Dawes Commission. Under the Curtis Act of 1898 and the 1902 Choctaw-Chickasaw Supplemental Agreement, each Chickasaw citizen received 320 acres of allotted land, with each designating a homestead of up to 160 acres that remained inalienable during their lifetime. Beyond these homestead designations, tribal members could dispose of their surplus allotted lands through a systematic alienation schedule. 1/4 could be sold after 1 year, another fourth after 3 years, and the remaining half after 5 years from patent issuance. This surplus land disposal process generated the complex web of certificates of purchase, federal patents, and tribal nation conveyances that appear in courthouse records. As tribal members like Sophie Williams sold their surplus filings to non-Indian purchasers through competitive bidding systems administered by the Commissioner to the 5 civilized tribes. The entire process created over 250,000 enrollment applications, final rolls for 101,000 approved tribal members, and a hybrid legal framework where federal trust law intersected with emerging state property regulations after Oklahoma statehood in 1907. Well, Claude did a pretty good job summarizing all of that. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it was nice to get some background information on all of that. Well, I was initially pretty excited about this potential family connection, and I continued searching for additional records involving this R.E. Frazier. I found Sophie Williams had executed a lease to R.E. Frazier for additional land in sections 20 and 29 in Township 7 South, Range 2 East on the same day, January 31st, 1908, suggesting that he was actively acquiring property in the area. And following Frazier's ownership chronologically, I discovered he held onto these lands until February 21st, 1912, when now identified as being of Butler County, Kansas. He sold the consolidated properties in sections 20, 21, and 29 to Rupert P. Bowles. A major clue about R.E. Frazier's identity was that his 1912 deed did not include a wife as a co-grantor, and most of the other deeds that I had seen so far in Love County did include a spouse if there was one. And my ancestor, Richard E. Frazier, was married to Nancy E. Briscoe Frazier and resided in Burneyville until his death in 1911. Nancy survived him and she died in 1924. So, as I analyzed these records more carefully, it became clear that R.E. Frazier in the deeds of 1908 and 1912 was not the same Richard E. Frazier buried in the Burneyville Cemetery because he died in 1911. Also, the geographic references to El Dorado, Kansas and Butler County, Kansas, the timing, no spouse, and other contextual clues indicated that this was a different person entirely. A reminder that common names can lead us astray without careful analysis. And initials also can be tricky because his name probably wasn't Richard. Maybe it was Robert or something else. So while it was kind of disappointing, this discovery was a valuable insight into the broader patterns of land speculation and investment occurring during Oklahoma's early statehood period, with investors from Kansas and other states actively acquiring and trading Indian Territory surplus lands.
That is super interesting. And this reminded me that there's a Richard Frazier born the exact same year as him in the same county, I believe in Missouri. And I had them confused for a long time, and they were cousins. So I don't think this would be the same one, however, it could be. And they obviously have different parents, but they are on the same line. And this whole idea of same named men is such a problem in our genealogies. So good job in figuring that out, that this was not ours, even though it was probably exciting. And he could totally be related. There was a group of Frasers there, but he could also not be related, just like some of the Harrises aren't related.
All right. And with those common surnames, like Harris is an obviously common surname, but Fraser, I think, is less obvious that it's common, but I think it is pretty common. I
Yeah.
mean, we probably all know someone named Fraser. And so it's just important to remember that some of these names are very common.
And especially if we don't live in an area that maybe you see that surname as much. We've all had the experience where we're researching in a county and we think our surname is so unique, and then there's just a ton of people there with that surname,
Yeah.
whether they're related or not.
Right. Because their great grandfather settled there and now they have them and all their cousins living there.
Exactly, exactly. So the next thing to really understand was this indexing system and how it had evolved during its early years. So there was an index titled 678 South, 123 West, Book 1, and that covered the period from the beginning of the county till November 13. And then this early comprehensive index revealed important information about the county's administrative development. After that date of November 1913, the indexes were reorganized and split into more specific geographic divisions. So there was 678 South 1 West, book 1 of 4 books, and 678 South 2 West, book 1 of 4 books, and 6-7 South 3 West, book 1 of 3 books. So it sounds like they really had to start dividing things up. So interesting to be there looking at the records right at the beginning of how they're trying to get organized. Well, this reorganization reflected how the county was growing and many more land transactions starting to take place. And so they needed a more detailed indexing system. And when we go into research, whether it's online or at a courthouse like this, we really have to figure out the indexing system. We've got to understand how things are organized because it can affect how we are searching. And we might be missing something if we don't understand that there is another book for the rest of the years or for the rest of the alphabet or however they have divided things up.
That's so true. And I almost did miss some things because I didn't know where all these indexes were, but having 3 days was key. Well, while I was working through this early index, I found several additional records that helped provide context for my Harris family research. And one particularly interesting discovery was a mortgage release. And this was in Miscellaneous Book 5, dated March 2nd, 1909, involving J.D. and S.A. Rice and John C. Harris. This document revealed that John C. Harris had previously loaned $250 to J.D. and S.A. Rice, secured by lots 1 and 2 in Block 4 in the town of Marietta. The mortgage release confirmed that the Rices had fully satisfied their debt, and John C. Harris was releasing his claim on their Marietta property. I originally had misunderstood this record, and I even wrote about it wrong in my kinship determination project. I scanned the mortgage and assumed that because it was for lots 1 and 2, it was the same property that John was taxed on in 1908 and forward. However, reading it now, I realized that it was for lots 1 and 2 of Block 4, while the other property was lots 1 and 2 of Block 63. So different blocks. But as I walked in the courthouse the first morning, I had taken a picture of a map on the wall in the hall of the courthouse, and it was a map of Marietta City. And before even knowing it was significant to my research, I had taken a picture of it. And the map shows that Block 63 and Block 4 are actually adjacent to each other through their backyards. So lots 1 and 2 of these blocks are also adjacent. So they are neighbors. So I had incorrectly assumed that John C. Harris was paying off his mortgage in this mortgage release. However, it was the other way around. So his neighbors, the Rice family, paid off their mortgage to him. So he must have loaned them money, maybe because he was their neighbor, or perhaps he sold them that land. I couldn't find a deed for this land from John C. Harris to J.D. Rice, so more research will be needed to figure that out. But this discovery was significant for several reasons because it demonstrated that John C. Harris was financially stable enough to make substantial loans to other community members, providing insight into his economic status in those early years of Love County. And the transaction also revealed business relationships within the community, showing how John C. Harris, supported each other's property acquisitions through private financing arrangements. So hopefully I can find if there is a deed for the Rice family to see, is it truly a loan from a neighbor friend, or was it that Rice purchased the land from John C. Harris, where John C. Harris had bought all the town lots and then sold half of them to the neighbors? Right now I'm not sure, but those are the two options.
Interesting. I love how that you took that deed and then really thought about what it meant and how it showed that he was financially stable enough to be making loans, because that economic status is really important in understanding our ancestors and can be the reason why they moved or, did a number of things. Well, one of the most intriguing discoveries of the afternoon was a set of volumes labeled Town Patent Books. And these older volumes looked really interesting, but they had a challenge. They did not have an apparent index system. So they required page by page examination to look for those relevant records. So you decided to just do it, systematically page through these volumes and looking for any names connected to our family. And congratulations, it proved worthwhile because you found several interesting discoveries that really shed light on this broader community context. So the town patents were for Burneyville or Leon and many more.
Right. So we had talked a little bit about these town ideas in the last episode, but basically they in Love County had two kinds of land that wasn't in a town or city, and then land that was in a town. And so the town lots were divided differently than regular land outside of the towns. And so outside of the towns, it was just what section, township range, and aliquots. And then within the town, it was like a block number. And then, it could be lots 1 and 2 of block 63. So I think what these town patent books were like the original people who purchased a lot within the town. And I didn't see a book for Marietta. I did see Burneyville or Leon. So I wondered where that other one was. But the first one that I saw that had a name I recognized was the John O. Briscoe Town Patent. And the name Briscoe is familiar to us because Nancy E. Briscoe is the mother of Doc Harris's wife, Alice Frazier. And so there's definitely some Briscoes in our family tree right there. I just don't know exactly who this John O. Briscoe was in relation to them. But the grantor of the town patent was the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations, and then the grantee was John O. Briscoe. And the property was lots 1 and 2 in block 91 of the town of Orr within Chickasaw Nation Indian Territory. So these were done before statehood. So the towns were organized in 1904. Around then, that's when this patent was given. And he paid $5.13. So it doesn't really sound like much. The significance is that this deed is showing the official transfer of land from the Chickasaw Nation to Briscoe, and it was recorded in Indian Territory. So I don't really know for sure the family connection between John O. Briscoe and our ancestor, Nancy E. Briscoe. I'll have to do additional research, but it was neat to see that this type of small town property transaction existed in a time before statehood during the territorial period. I did ask Claude to do deep research on this topic, and it said the Dawes Commission systematically surveyed and platted 308 town sites across 5 civilized tribes' territories, with town lots auctioned to the public through detailed processes that generated extensive patent records found in courthouses. Communities with populations exceeding 200 were surveyed and platted under congressional acts of 1900 and 1902, while smaller towns could have up to 40 acres set aside for municipal purposes. Federal appraisal boards, comprising of a federal appointee, tribal appointee, and occupant appointee, determined improvement values for existing occupants who received compensation from townsite sale proceeds. The Choctaw and Chickasaw nations retained significant involvement in these processes, despite losing governmental sovereignty under the Curtis Act, participating in patent execution for town lots and maintaining revenue distribution systems for tribal members. These town patents, which granted individual ownership of lots within established municipalities, appear frequently in courthouse records, alongside the certificates of purchase and final conveyances that documented the two-step process of federal oversight followed by tribal nation completion of property transfers.
Well, that's really interesting. And I'm looking at the image that you put into the blog post, and I noticed that it is signed by Green McCurtain, who was the principal chief of the Choctaw Nation. So that's cool. And then there was the governor of the Chickasaw Nation, P.S. Mosley, that also signed it. So that's fascinating. How interesting. I had no idea that this is how all of this territory was organized and the land was distributed.
Yeah, seems like a complex thing with the multiple jurisdictions, the federal oversight and then the nations. So it was interesting to see the records created from that.
Absolutely. Well, another fascinating discovery was a town patent granted to the Deacons of the Church of Christ of Leon. And this was particularly meaningful because we know that the Harris family belonged to the Church of Christ, but you weren't certain whether they attended services in Leon, Marietta, or both communities. So the church patent gave some insight into how religious communities were establishing their institutional presence during this territorial transition period. And it also reinforced the importance of Leon as a community center for the Harris family. We knew that John C. Harris had business connections there and Arza Harris lived there. And now there is some evidence of the family's likely church community being formally established there with this property ownership. So this was a great discovery, and it's such a good reminder that we can benefit so much from understanding all the context. You were able to see so much in this research session about the community and the institutions like churches. So, just a good reminder for all of us to think about our ancestors in the context of a whole community, not just looking at their property transactions and family relationships.
Right. And the Church of Christ itself did not have hardly any records at all, just based on their beliefs in their organization. But I did purchase a book called Churches of Christ in Oklahoma that helped me understand the church a little bit better and any record keeping practices that they had. So because they didn't really keep any records, it was nice to have this showing that where the church property was. And based on the information summarized by Claude in the Deep Research Project, it seems like the church might have already existed there, and then they formalized the process of whoever's already there paying a little bit to the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations for the land they're already using. So I think that might have been what was happening. Who knows for sure, but it was really neat. And so this was like the end of my second day of research. It showed that patience and systematic exploration of early records can yield some treasures, even when the initial discoveries don't exactly lead where I expected them to. But it really did help me understand some of the historical context and just what was happening during that territorial transition period to statehood. So, in our next episode about this research trip, we'll talk more about continuing the tax record research that I had done later that afternoon on day 2.
Wow, you were able to do so much. I'm so impressed with how much you got done with all of your research. So neat. Well, we hope everyone listening has enjoyed hearing about this on-site research and this transition between Indian Territory and statehood. It's just a good reminder of how every location is unique, and it's so good to just dig in and see what you can learn. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.